just some chaos in the church. Now, really and truly, if you go and you look at the letters that Paul wrote, the majority of his letters, if not all of them, was really of the same context. That's what he was dealing with. Paul was always trying to straighten things out in the local church. And thankfully, a lot of what we do as far as leadership now, and just as believers and as community of believers, thankfully we have his letters to learn from. All right? Just like Sunday, we talked about 1 Corinthians 13, and we're going to pick up with that this Sunday, but we're going to talk about the fruit of the Spirit. But 1 Corinthians 13, Paul goes over a list of things or ways or attitudes that we should have toward one another. So Paul was really, he's defending the grace message against the law, but he's also just giving them what I've kind of dubbed as an operational manual to say, listen, as people of God, you need to act a certain way. And here's how you need to act. All right? If you're going to be a part of the family, I mean, how many of you raised kids? Everybody in here. How many of you have ever told your child, as long as you live under this roof, how many of you have ever said that statement? As long as you live under this roof, you're going to act like this. Now, when you're out there, you act like you won't. Well, not necessarily, but so we have a desire, don't we, for our children to live at a certain level of morality and a certain level of a life that is ethical. And, so Paul, kind of the same thing with the church. Hey, let's live together a certain way. And he lays it out for us and we can study it. But what was Paul doing? He was defending the grace message. He was trying to bring some order to the chaos in the local church. But he was also in a continued effort to help people understand the message of grace versus the message of the law. So what I like to do is dig a little deeper sometimes into some of those topics. And tonight I want us to look at the law. Now I may give you a little opportunity, if you so choose, to share a few things. I may have a couple questions for you. And for the sake of the camera, if we do have a question, I will just repeat it. We don't have a microphone ready. But if we do, I will, I'll just repeat it for the camera. All right. So let's talk about the law. Go to, if you've got your Bible, we're going to go to Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. Let me go to my Bible app here and get it open. So when we talk about the law, the thing that Paul was so adamant to help people understand that it wasn't completely necessary anymore is the scriptural base for the law is going to begin in Exodus chapter 19, verses 1 through 6, that says this: In the 3rd month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. All right. So it is at this moment, so we know, according to the Bible, they have come out of Egypt. They are on their way to the promised land. They're going to dwell for, many, many years before they get there. But God is choosing, for some reason, for the Israelites to be a very special group of people to him. The law that God is about to establish with Moses, that we are seeing here in Exodus 19, if you just go over one more chapter, we're going to see where it begins. It's called the Mosaic Law. All right. Now, they had just come out. Well, let's see. Let me not say that. This is the beginning of the law, where Moses is pulled aside. God expresses to him his desire to have a group of people that will not only worship him, but will keep the law, keep the covenant. So you could say it like this, that the original law, the Mosaic law, was God's original covenant with the Israelites. All right? So if we go over one chapter, Exodus 20, we know that Moses is on the mountain, and here's where you get your 10 commandments. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And here is commandment number 1. You shall have no other gods before me. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. Now I want to stop right there, because have you ever heard something from the Bible and you hear it, people say it, and it just kind of in passing, and if you go and you actually read it and take a moment to kind of think about it and meditate on it, you just feel the impact of it? Well, that's one of those times right here today when I was reading the 10 Commandments. Now, I've always looked at the 10 Commandments. You know, you see them on signs and things that people will put in the yard. But have you ever really read the 10 Commandments? I mean, this is the original covenant that God is making with Israel. And God is saying, basically, he's saying, if you want to be a special, set-apart people, do this. And the first thing he says is, don't serve any other God. Now, this is part of the reason. You go all the way back, you fast forward all the way to Paul, and Paul is saying, it's by grace and grace alone. When you start adding something else to it, you're doing what? You're breaking the original covenant. You're breaking one of the original 10 commandments of not having any other gods besides, or any worship any other God but God. All right? So when I read this, when he says, I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. That sounds harsh, doesn't it? So here's why it's so important that you and I love Jesus now. Because we have generations that's going to come behind us. And that's God's words. He says, I'll put an iniquity on four generations down for those that hate me. This is the original covenant. What he's trying to say is listen, you serve me and me alone, and your lineage, generations behind you will be blessed. But if you don't, they won't be blessed. All right? That's the original covenant of God. Now, that sounds harsh, and I know we're under grace now, but listen, the original covenant still has some bearing on us, don't it? All right? Is it okay to murder? No. So that's part of the original. All right? But here's the beauty of it. He says that, but in verse 6 he says, but showing mercy, now this is a still of one sentence, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. And I want to say thousands of generations. All right? He says this is part of the original covenant. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now, we could actually spend probably an entire night talking about what it means to take the Lord's name in vain. Most people think it means cussing, and I don't think that's what it means. Because I don't think they cussed back in the day. Maybe I'm wrong. You know, maybe they didn't have 4-letter cuss words, and I think it means something totally different. But that's not what we're talking about. He says this, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Here's another one. Honor your father and your mother, and your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God has given you. Here you go. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is of your neighbor's. Now that was the original covenant. That was the law. Now, that was the original Mosaic law. All right? So from there, we know that the Jewish people had their way of worship, and there was 613 additional laws that they put in that is called the Torah. All right? Let's see here. I'm going to give you some of the notes that I have just to help some of this make a little better sense. The Mosaic law was given around 1446 BC, based on some of the traditional dating that we have, as a part of God's covenant with Israel. Now, here's the thing. It wasn't just a set of rules, but rather it was a blueprint for a holy nation set apart to God. So in other words, God did not just say, I'm going to give you these rules. What he's saying is if you will do this and follow this, I will build you into a great nation. So this was the original covenant. All right. Here's an interesting thing, and we're going to dig into this a little bit deeper, because here's one of the questions out of the very first scripture. Let's see. Where was it at here? Exodus 19, if you go back, Exodus chapter 19, verse 5, verse 6. He says, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So what does it mean to be a kingdom of priests? Now, God's giving them this blueprint to be a successful nation. He's given them this blueprint to be a nation that God will bless. And he uses the term, you will be a kingdom of priests if you follow these commandments. So let's talk about what it means to be a kingdom of priests. And again, I'm just going to read my notes the way I've got them in here rather than try to walk around them, talk around them. Its meaning is tied directly to God's overarching plan for his people. This phrase comes from Exodus 19, chapter 19, verse 5 through 6, where God tells Israel, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, which is what we just read. Now, what does that mean? First, a priest, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, you would know, you've probably read about priests. A priest is someone who stands in the gap between God and people. They represent God to the people and the people to God. So when God calls Israel a kingdom of priests, he's saying that their role isn't just about being his chosen people for their own benefit. It's about being a bridge for the rest of the world to know him. They were meant to reflect his character, his holiness, and his love to the nations. All right. So think about temple worship back in the Old Testament. There was a priest, right? And the priest had priestly duties. And what was that? Some of the duties that they had. Does any of y'all have any teaching from that, priestly duties? They were to represent what, Gary? Gary, you But a priest was seen as someone who had direct connection with God. So they were, as it says, they were kind of in the gap with the people. Yes. Yes. So if you think when God looks at Israel and says you're going to be a holy nation, you're going to be a kingdom of priests, all right? Essentially what he's saying is he's relating to the fact that we will understand priesthood because of the Old Testament and the style of worship they had. So the priests were people that was in between. They were standing in the gap between God, and they were representatives of God for the people, but they were also representatives of people for God. So when people would come to the temple, they would come to the priest, and the priest would, in a sense, be a stand between or a go-between them and God. So when God is talking about Israel being a nation that will be considered a kingdom of priests, I think what he's saying is that out of that nation will be many other nations. All right? Out of that nation we will be, because the Bible even talks about we are a chosen people and a royal priesthood. So I think what he's saying here, what he's referring to is that the nation will be that go-between, that God will deal with them, and they will be representatives of him, that people will see God by the way God deals with them. Does that make any sense to you? All right. All of this ties into the original covenant that God was making with Israel. All right, so you have to remember this. They were to abide by the law, but yet they still had this opportunity to have a very close relationship with God. All right, let me hang on one second. Let me just read my notes here. 1 Peter 2:9, this is what I was talking about. But you, this is New Testament, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. You and I are to be a representation of the Spirit of God here on this earth. All right? That's what sets us apart from the rest, and they were to be set apart from the rest of the world. But here's what we have to understand, because we come to the Old Testament, and a lot of us like to live in the New Testament because of the New Covenant. But we have to understand that the Old Testament and the New Testament are not two separate books. You see, I love to study into the Old Testament because you can see Jesus from the Genesis to Revelation. All right? So you can see Jesus through the Old Testament. And I love to see how God dealt with the people before Jesus came to the earth. And he dealt with the people before Jesus came to be the fulfillment of the law. And to help us understand grace, God dealt with his people through the law. All right? And through these commandments. And it wasn't, like I said, and this is the beauty of it, because we tend to think when we hear the word law, we think that he put these rules and these regulations and said, you're going to live like this, you're not going to live like this. We think of terms like we don't want to break the law of like speeding, or we don't want to break the law by going in the grocery department and coming out or grocery store and coming out with something that we didn't pay for or whatever. That it's not that way. God was saying, listen, if you're going to be a great nation, this is what you're going to have to do. And it was more like a blueprint, really, than it was a set of rules. We still have that. God still gives us a blueprint. I don't have my Bible to pick up, but if I did, we still have a blueprint of how to be a great nation. Don't serve any other God but God. So when we think about that, if you say, well, even right now, if y'all were to come here Sunday and I would have this golden image of something, and I would say, I had a revelation over the weekend. And I think we need to start worshiping whatever. Harold. Most of y'all would leave. All right? Why? Good point. Why would you leave? Why do you know that? Where at? In the Mosaic Law. So some of that still applies to us, right? All right, so if we look at part of the law, now here we go, because Judaism says that, and we're going to talk about this in just a second. That's why I want to read the Ten Commandments. Judaism takes the other 613 Jewish laws and says you have to, if you still want to be saved and you want to be in Judaism, now you have to apply those to your life as well. I say no. That's my theology. I say no. I say that I take the Ten Commandments as the basis of the law of God's, eternal law, God's universal law, and I live my life now. I'm not diving into worship of anything else because I understand that God says, you shall have no other gods before me from the very beginning of time. Because he says, if you want to be a great nation, don't worship anything else. If you want to be a great nation, don't steal, don't murder, don't be envious, don't covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife. Don't have adultery. So if we put all of that aside, we're chaotic. But we look at life and we say, wait a minute, we're not under the law. But where was that law from? That's God's law. We didn't get away from that law. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. That was one of the questions that in some of the studying I was doing, it said, one of the questions said, when you look at the Ten Commandments, which one is most broken? And what is those? What are those? The Sabbath. What about adultery? What about stealing? I mean, we're a lawless society. And whenever we say we're a lawless society, I say that we are a lawless society from a spiritual perspective. If as a country we would become a society governed just by the Ten Commandments, we would be a really good nation. It'd be cool, wouldn't it? I mean, if nobody stole anything, if next week you went without any murders, all right, that would be a huge starting point, wouldn't it? All right. So we realize that God says from the very beginning, I'm going to give you a blueprint for success. I'm not going to. Let me see if I can find this right quick, because I want to tell y'all this, because they came. What's that? Okay, we'll take up some questions right at the end. How's that? So one of the questions that I've read said, why was it that God gave them the law right after they came out of their bondage. They weren't governed. All right. So I did some research. All right. So here's a couple things that I wrote down. And I've learned this firsthand. Most people can't handle freedom. All right. So I had a friend that spent most of his adult life in the penitentiary. And I remember one time he got out, and I went to him, and I'm talking to him about staying out. And he's like, man, I know I learned my lesson, blah, blah, blah. Well, about 2 weeks later, he had a shootout with deputies. He went right back. All right. So he got out 2 or 3 times, and within just a short time, he would be back. So I did a little research, and here's just a small statistic. 70% of released prisoners are rearrested within 5 years of being released. Why? Because they can't handle freedom. Now, I think God knew they got themselves in the position they were in Egypt because they couldn't handle themselves. And God said, listen, if you're going to be a great nation, you got to have some rules. Not rules, but you got to have this law to live by. All right? I mean, I guess we could call them rules, huh? You know? Hey, don't kill nobody. That's a rule. Policies and procedures. Here's rule number 1. All right? Now, I want to keep reminding you that we're studying Galatians. And Paul is helping the church move from this mentality to a mentality of freedom, of grace, but an understanding of restriction through the Spirit, if that makes any sense. Here, they had these literal laws. Here we have grace, but we have the Spirit of God that gives us the unction to not break those laws. All right? Because without something, I don't care who you are, any of us in here, we can't handle freedom. I mean, my wife goes away on the ladies' trip for 4 days, and I don't make the bed. I don't cook. I clean the dishes when I'm watching her on Life 360. She ain't in here, is she? She's 2 hours away, and I start cleaning the house, make it look like it's been that way. I can't handle freedom, all right? None of us can handle. If we was absolutely free, we would struggle because our flesh, you know. So we have to keep in mind that what Paul is saying, he's trying to pull people out of a generational after generation of a lifestyle that was tied to the Mosaic law, all right? To take that understanding of God's universal law into the message of grace. All right, so the 10 Commandments. Let's see. I got a bunch of notes here, y'all. Just bear with me. So the Mosaic law, which is basically the 10 Commandments, is separated several ways. Now, this is more just for an understanding of the law. The moral law. All right, so when you read those in Exodus, timeless principles like the 10 Commandments, no idolatry, no murder, no adultery, those things help us reflect God's character, and that's more of like a moral law. Now, ceremonial law, which is when we get into the Jewish, to the Jewish way of the law, I'm trying to just read, is more what they would call a ceremonial law. It was the rules for worship, sacrifices, feast. Example would be the Passover in Exodus 12, the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16, And these pointed to future redemptions and were fulfilled by Christ. Then you've got the civil law guidelines for Israel's society, like justice systems, property rights, and dietary laws. These were tailored to ancient Israel, but offer wisdom for ethics today. That was just what a commentator, stole that from one of the commentators. So the law that we reflect back to when we talk about the law is not just the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments was the basis for it. You have 613 other laws that was added along the way, and they are broken into those ways. There was a moral side, a ceremonial side, and a civil side. In other words, kind of an internal, and the ceremony, which was the rituals and the sacrifices and all of that. There was all rules and regulations to that. And then the civil was civil living. This is how we did it. Yes. So there are religions that still believe that you need to apply right in today's society. It's Judy, huh? You believe all or none? It's can't keep them all. All right, let's so this is honestly tonight, man, this is just a lot of information. I've spent hours looking at this law, and I'm about lawed out, to be honest with you. But it gives me a good understanding of what Paul was up against. Because like I said, for generations and generations, this is how the Israelites lived. God said, you're going to be a chosen nation, and through you are going to be a stand-in-the-gap nation where people are going to see how I deal with you, and then you're going to be that chosen generation. All right. So someone told me that when you become a believer, that you become engrafted, you become an Israelite. All right. So that's what some of like Judaism believes that. So if you become a believer, you become an Israelite by default, by believing. Well, my theology doesn't line up with that. I believe I become grafted into the family of God, all right? And when I get baptized, I'm baptized into the family of God. But it was through the Israel nation that we see the fulfillment of the gospel, all right? Let's see. So when we talk about the fulfillment of the law, to connect the Old Testament to the New Testament, Matthew 5:17 and through 20, Galatians 5:13 through 14 is the key scriptures. Jesus says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Galatians urges freedom in Christ, and the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus perfectly fulfilled the law. He had a sinless life. All right, that's the moral part. The ceremonial side, he was the ultimate sacrifice. And then the civil side, he was the king of a spiritual kingdom. Christians are not under the Mosaic law. Again, this is just some commentary that I've just jotted down, copied and pasted, so it's not like my great revelatory knowledge here. Christians are not under the Mosaic law as a covenant, but uphold its moral essence through love and the Spirit. I thought this was good right here. The law still teaches us about God, convicts us of sin, and guides us with ethics. What do you think? So Gary was finishing my sentence there when we say that Jesus came to fulfill the law. What does that mean to you? Mm-hmm. He was the ultimate sacrifice. So he fulfilled that ceremonial side of the law by being the ultimate sacrifice. As we just said, he was the, mm-hmm. So grace, no, we still don't need to do it. I mean, fortunately, we have this thing called repentance. And that's the grace of God. Gives us the ability to repent for the sins that we commit. And a lot of the sins that we commit are strictly related to the law of the Ten Commandments. All right? So here's a thought. We've been looking at, and we'll get back into Galatians next week, but Paul was doing his very best to teach the message of grace. Paul did not come up with the message of grace. He got it by revelation, but Jesus brought the message of grace when he came to the earth. All right? So Paul was simply continuing the message that Jesus started. So when Jesus hit the earth as an infant, his time here on earth, I read this article this week, and it just kind of, matter of fact, I think it was Elena's dad that wrote it. Jesus did not begin in the New Testament. Jesus is all through the Old Testament and all the way. He just became flesh at a certain point in time. All right? So Jesus comes in the flesh to introduce God's grace and mercy to humanity. But I'm going to tell you, hear me. God's grace and mercy was woven all through humanity before Jesus ever stepped foot on this earth. Just look at the life of Israel. Look at how many times they messed up and God was gracious to them. Look at how gracious God was to Adam and Eve when they messed up. He could have destroyed them in a twinkling of an eye, but he did not destroy them. He moved them out of the garden. But he still had grace and mercy on them. He had grace and mercy on Israel. All these years that they would mess up, God was still gracious to them. They'd mess up and God would give them an opportunity to get it back straight. Jesus comes in the flesh to fulfill all of this other side of the law that they were dealing with, to say, you know what, that's no longer necessary. You now live and can live under grace as long as you now live by the Spirit. Or I hope you're getting a visual of that. The law, let's just say that the law was external. All right? The Spirit of God is internal. Jesus had to come so that he could go back, so that the Spirit of God could come to us. It wasn't that we went from one set of rules to another set of rules. It was just that we went from relating to them. He knew we couldn't live the other way. But he knew that we couldn't. So the Spirit of God helps us relate to the law differently. It's through conviction, not. That's the huge key. Right.
That was the thing that I
Mm-hmm. A law, listen.
You go burn in hell with those that did.
I can. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. So my whole point in this tonight, and I'm no theologian on the law, I just did my best to pull some to hopefully give you a little bit. I would love it if you would study it out for yourself. But my whole point in this for tonight was to help us understand what it actually was that Paul was up against. What he was trying to help people understand, and even us today, that I always, for many years, felt this release from Old Testament law when I would hear people say, well, Jesus come to fulfill the law. All right? But then in my mind, I still was dealing a little bit with the Ten Commandments, thinking, well, wait a minute, we're still tied to that. But in reality, the reality of it is, we are still tied to that. Jesus didn't come to do away with, that's what he said, I didn't come to do away with it, I come to fulfill it. And then we now have the Spirit of God in us that gives us the conviction that we need, because here's the thing, if we didn't have a moral compass, there would be more murders, there would be more riots, there would be more chaos, there would be more people stealing. I mean, we would be in a terrible, terrible mess. Absolutely. So I always love when you have somebody that they're really out there. I had a friend, Ricky Sinclair. He came here right up when we started here and preached a youth revival. And Ricky, he wrote a book, A Miracle at Large was the name of his book. But Ricky was a drug dealer back in the 80s. And he was dealing with a lot of these Mexican cartels, and he was a bad guy. And his story is they chased him in the Tunica Hills with Angola chase team for like 50 days and couldn't catch him. He had on a pair of blue jean shorts, and that was it. And he tells some stories, man, of eating armadillo on the half shell. Said he lived in a deer stand, and he found an old cat food can, and he got the top off of it, and he would sneak up on them armadillos and pop them behind the head, and he would skin them with that can. Ricky was just a bad guy, all right? Did some stuff. Went to jail, was supposed to go to jail for a long time. In jail, had a black guy that was the night jailer, an older guy. And he said the guy would come through, and he would always tell him, son, I'm praying for you. Son, I'm praying for you. And said he come through there one day, and he gave him a Bible. And from that, Ricky got saved. Got out of jail early, has been pastoring a church ever since, and God sent him all over the world to tell his testimony and preach the gospel of God's grace and mercy. All right? So, without that conversion, he'd have been a drug dealer till the day he died. So, that's the beauty that we have. A law doesn't convert you. The Spirit of God converts you. And then you have the Spirit of God in you to then get a moral compass and some ethics about yourself to say, you know what? God's law is valuable to me. I'm not going to break that law so that I don't wind up either dead or incarcerated or whatever the case may be. So, all right, you had a question over here. We'll try to answer it. They follow Saturday. Mm-hmm.
That's why they rush
on a Saturday. And see, that's a good one. That is something that I've never really studied a whole lot, because we don't, yeah. So we kind of see Sunday as a Sabbath, but yet we're at church and we're worshiping, we're doing things, and but you go home on Sunday afternoon, you watch football, kick up, and most people don't try not to work on Sundays. But our environment, our culture has taken away the Sabbath. A lot of places are open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So there's no appreciation. Oh, absolutely. I remember those. And you know what changed those, huh?
They could sell certain things.
Yep. Night shifts were changed by World War II. They were having to work around the clock to produce things for the military, and they said, hey, we can do this, and they started having things around the clock. But yeah, there was a blue law at one time. I remember it. Nothing was open on Sundays.
Yeah, you didn't have malls open. You couldn't
No.
sell dry goods. You couldn't, I don't think you could buy
Yeah.
any kind of dry goods.
Nothing.
You could go into a bar and drink beer.
Yeah. It was hid behind the sheet.
Some places they serve food. Then they started with serve food. You could serve alcohol.
Yeah.
You couldn't serve just alcohol.
All right, so hopefully, like I said, tonight was more honestly just an informative. Like I said, I'm about lawed out because I read so many different commentaries and so many different articles, but it all is really they all say the same thing, if that makes any sense. That mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Well informed, he knew the law. He could argue with
Mm-hmm.
the Judaizers and what have you about what it was to be a Christian and what the law was. He knew the law probably better than they.
And he even said that. He even said, I was the Pharisee of Pharisees. He was well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Leave him alone, because if it ain't, if it is of God, there ain't nothing you can do up against God. If it ain't of God, it's out.
So you take the law, and you think about today. Here's the thing, and I think here lately we've been seeing a lot of this. We have this, what is it, the First Amendment, all right, gives you the right to freedom of speech. But I think we've learned here recently, and some have learned the hard way, that just because you have the freedom of speech doesn't always mean you have the freedom of the consequences from what you said. And to be quite honest, man, I believe if we applied that in our lives and in the church, we would avoid a lot of mess. Because sometimes in the church, we say some of the craziest stuff. You know? Think it, and you say it, and then you go, oh, Jesus, did I say that? Look, I can't tell y'all how many times on a Sunday I go home, and I'm going home, and I'm reliving. Now, most of the time, I don't remember a thing of what I say when I'm preaching. But sometimes I'm going home, and I'm going, did I say that? And Renee, she'll be like, honey, you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I will be. You know, and I'm just going over it in my mind. I'm thinking, my God. And then I go back to the live stream, and I'm listening to it, and I'm going, why did I say that? Behind my lips from saying anything that.
Because this thing takes over, man, I may say.
Now, I will say this. I used to be a lot worse than I am now. So you can train yourself to be careful with what you say. You can learn. Yeah, it's hard. But facial expressions, yeah, I mean, I can look and say, yeah, KC, I love you. Or I can say, yeah, I love you. Yeah, I love you. You know. Yeah. I-12 is a bad influence. Here, let me. I'm not going to even encourage you to go study any more about the law. We're not under it. I would say go back and read the Ten Commandments, and just take a few moments and meditate on them. One of the articles I was reading, the guy he put the Ten Commandments out, and he just blatantly said it. The little thing he said, now which one of these did you break today? You know, and it's not a question if we were going to break them. It's a question of which one did we break. But if you put that in your mind and you get those there, they really can be that compass, man, and those lines in the road that keep us in some form of.
You know, Ten Commandments, if you think about it,
those days, they didn't have the Bible and all with the idol worshiper, and they killed him. But it was to let us know today. I know it's wrong. They were my people. I tell them I killed them. But it's commandments that are perfect for me not to do. It just let me know how simple, I can be.
That's what they were, a mirror for us to see how bad we were, but they couldn't fix us. That's where the Spirit of God comes in and lets you look at the Word, but it has a way to fix you. So, yeah. So that's what is the the model prayer. It covers it all. If you say the Father's prayer, the Lord's prayer, every day, you got it covered. That's why Jesus, that's New Testament. They said, teach us to pray. He prays a simple prayer, and it's like, okay, we just covered it all right there. So, all right, let me give you a couple things of prayer, and then we're going to take our group picture real quick before we get out of here. So we got Gino, Samat,